me introduce our the microphone. Professor Clive Wynne heads the Canine Science Collaboratory at Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. He is an animal psychologist, but luckily for us, he is open to interdisciplinary collaboration. And he is here through an EDUP mentor grant, and he is mentoring our lovely animal studies team. That is me, Sarah, Jack, Asha, who are sitting there in the back. Part of the deal is that he also has to give a public lecture. This is the second public lecture that he's giving. The first one was yesterday at psychology. Professor Wynne received his PhD from Edinburgh University and has worked at many prestigious universities on 3 continents, first in Germany, then in Australia, and then in the US, first in Florida, then in Arizona, where he is today. And it's very hot in Arizona. His early work was on the cognitive abilities of pigeons. And he later moved on to researching wolves. He still serves on the board of directors of Wolf Park in Indiana, and our closest friends, dogs. In addition to dozens of articles, he has published several books, and I'm going to list the titles of the books because there are so many articles that I couldn't list their titles. Animal Cognition, The Mental Lives of Animals. Do Animals Think? By Princeton University Press. Animal Cognition, Evolution, Behavior, and Cognition. And then Dog is Love, the newest one. Why and How Your Dog Loves You. And of these, the last one, Dog is Love, has been translated into Polish as Pies jest miłością, and is going to be the basis of this talk. We have coupons from the publisher. Unfortunately, we do not have the books themselves, but if you have a copy, then I'm sure that Professor Wynne will be willing to sign it after his talk. Okay, on to your talk. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Justinian. Thank you for making this possible. This has been the most wonderful few days here. I wish I'd planned to come for longer, but there we are. I'm so happy to be here now, and thank you all for coming along. Now, who was at my talk yesterday? Okay, well, you can just ignore this part then. How many of you have a dog at home? Raise your hand if you have a dog at home. Okay. And keep your hand up if you let your dog sleep on your bed, which seems to be everybody who put their hand up in the first place. Okay, so now put your hand down because I don't want you to tell me the answer. I just want you to think about the question. And the question is, how many people are you willing to let sleep on your bed with you? Just think about it. And I think, I don't know you personally, but I think the answer is probably not very many. I think we would say that our beds are among the most private and intimate spaces in our lives. We don't share our beds with just anybody, or at least I'm going to make that assumption. And yet you're letting your dog share your bed with you. You're letting your dog share this very intimate space with you. Now, our zoologist friends, it's very exciting for me to be giving a talk in an English department. I've never done that before. But our zoologist friends tell us that the dog doesn't deserve to be considered its own species. All of our dogs are descended from wolves, and our zoologist friends tell us that the dog is just a subspecies of wolf. So let that sink in for a moment. You are letting a subspecies of wolf into the most intimate and private space in your life. And ultimately, that is the question that motivates me and fascinates me. How did a subspecies of wolf get to have such an intimate role in human lives? And so I'm going to start my remarks today by talking about the evolution of the dog. How did certain wolves get to be the animal that we call the animal that we call the dog, that we love as the dog, okay? So let's talk a little bit about that story of evolution. Here's how it starts. It starts with certain wolves back in the last ice age. The geneticists tell us that the particular wolves that evolved into dogs have disappeared. Certainly, genetically, they have never been identified, the actual wolves that were the ancestors of dogs. That started back in the last ice age. Now, the ice age was a terrible time, but there were periods in the ice age when there was so little of the planet that was habitable that people and other animals were squeezed up close to each other in these small pockets where you could actually survive. And it's probably during one of those periods that people and wolves started hanging out together. Now, at first, our ancestors would not have been happy about this. This would have been an intimidating thing to have had wolves close by to where you were living. But the wolves started to eat the things that the people couldn't eat, the trash, the refuse, the leftovers of human hunting. And wolves started doing that, and in doing so, they became human trash specialists. And in specializing on eating human rubbish, instead of on hunting things for themselves, they gradually became weaker and friendlier and started developing relationships with people. And that is how the story started. Why is there a picture on the screen of wolf poop? Well, that's because I got that photograph just 2 days ago in Overtalt. Is that how you pronounce it? Something like that. So here in Poland, I went out 3.5 hours northeast of here. There's a field station of your university where people study the wolves of Poland. And the wolves of Poland are very informative in this story because they've been able to identify that different groups of wolves specialize on different prey. So you have groups of wolves that prefer to hunt red deer, groups of wolves that prefer to hunt roe deer, and groups of wolves that specialize on different prey. They tend to stick together when they're forming new families. And so the fact that in Poland you find very slight genetic differences between groups of wolves that specialize on different prey, that suggests that when wolves 20,000 years ago started specializing on human trash, that would have also started to lead to genetic differences that over time gave us the animal we understand as the dog. Now, I don't think that our ancestors were happy about this. I think the stories that tell of people cuddling wolf puppies, I think those are fantasies. I think our ancestors found that whole business very frightening, right? But then the Ice Age came to an end. Now, when I was a kid in school and I learned that there had been ice ages and that they had come to an end, I thought, well, thank goodness I didn't live back in the Ice Ages. That sounds terrible. That sounds like a really bad situation, an ice age. But actually, our ancestors were very well adapted to living in the Ice Age. And when the Ice Age ended, that produced a whole bunch of new challenges for our forebears. And most of what I understand about this, I learned from this lady, Angela Perry. She's the expert. This is Angela Perry with my dog Zephos at my house. And like me, Angela is not keen on being kissed by dogs, but my dog is very keen on kissing people. And so I snapped this photo just in the moment after Zephos had kissed Angela. So anyway, so if you want to imagine the Ice Ages, think of Scotland. Think of some part of the world you know where it is very cold. And what are cold environments like? They may be completely devoid of trees, or if there is a forest, that forest is pine trees with a lot of open space between the trees. Our ancestors, like us, had excellent vision. Vision is a terrific way of detecting things in open environments. So our ancestors were very well able to hunt in cold environments like we had in the Ice Ages. Now think about places you know, warm environments. Warm environments tend to have very thick forests. And so as the world warmed up, empty areas became forested, and forested areas, the forest became much thicker with much denser undergrowth. When that happens, vision ceases to be useful. If I went hunting with native people in Nicaragua in tropical rainforest, and you cannot see a thing on the ground level. You can see birds in the trees, but you cannot see any animals on the ground in a tropical rainforest. Not only that, but even if you could see them, you cannot move quickly through a tropical rainforest. You need a big knife and you have to cut your way through. So our ancestors, the end of the Ice Age created a crisis for our ancestors. And they needed a smart technology. And the qualities that technology had to have are the following: that this technology had to have ways of detecting prey that relied on senses that are not affected by the thickness of a forest. Not vision, but smell and hearing. And this technology had to be able to chase the prey that it detected rapidly through the undergrowth. So it needed to be smaller than we are and able to move quickly through thick forest floors. It then needed to be motivated to chase the prey, and yet, having found the prey, it needed to be incapable of killing it and eating it, right? You might think you would go hunting with a wolf, but I'm here to tell you that if you were to try and go hunting with a wolf, the wolf would go hunting, and if the wolf loved you, it might come back 2 days later, and the wolf would be full and you would still be hungry. It's crucial to hunting with dogs that you are hunting with an animal which, although it can hear and smell where the prey is, and although it can chase the prey and find it and even make the prey stop, it is too weak and puny to kill the prey itself. And so what does a dog do in the Nicaraguan rainforest? It cries out. It says, "Human, human, I've found something, but now you need to come and kill it so we can eat it together." That's what the dog says in the Nicaraguan rainforest. And so the people run after the dog, much, much slower than the dog, but still they get there. And then with their pointed sticks, they kill the animal and they take it home, and the whole village is very happy, and they let the dogs have some too, so that it's a relationship that works. And it's at that point, I said that when wolves, dogs first started hanging around near people, the people didn't like that. I have no way of knowing for sure, but I don't think the people liked that. I think it was intimidating. It was frightening to have wolves on the edge of your settlement. But then the Ice Age ends, and this thing that has gradually become more dog-like starts being useful, and now you love that animal. That's a fantastic animal. And so at the end of the Ice Age, depends where you are in the world exactly when the Ice Age ended. 12,000 years ago, give or take, depending where you are. Later here in the north, earlier in the south. When the Ice Age ended, we begin to see people showing us that they care about dogs. How do they show us that they care about dogs? What do they have? They can't write books, can they? They're not writing music that survived over 10,000 years. What we have is that they start burying dogs. Last summer, I went to southern Sweden. I went to, southern Sweden, and where the red dot is. And 40 years ago, 30 years ago, a burial site was found near the coast. And in the burial site, there are many human beings buried. They're the sort of open shapes on the map here. And then there are also many dogs buried. They're the black dots. And what's interesting, these are people 8,000 years ago. How did they tell us that they loved their family members? They showed us because when they buried their aunts and their uncles and their fathers and their mothers, or their children, they placed in the grave the most valuable things that they had in their society. That was their way of communicating through the ages how much they loved these people. And you know what? When they buried their dogs, they also placed with the dogs the most valuable things that they had. And so I was able to see the remains of one dog that was buried. This dog was buried with more grave goods. That's what you call valuable things you put in a grave. This dog was buried with more grave goods than any of the human beings who were buried at this place. Isn't that an amazing thought? Now, you're not spotting them, right? Because it's all gray and brown. So let me help you. This is an axe made from a deer antler. That's another deer antler. And then these are stone knife heads. They would once have had wooden handles, but the handles have rotted away. Just the sharp stones remain. And here's a photograph of them separated out. So this is the earliest signal we have of people caring about dogs because dogs were making themselves useful. And so at the end of the Ice Age, we start seeing elaborate burials, and from then on, we see more and more. So I think the first evidence, and I showed this yesterday as well, the first evidence in pictures of people and dogs together is ancient Egypt, about 4,000 years ago. We have a few words. In this case, we just have the name of the dog and the man. Kuv is the man and Lupu is the dog. Very interesting, in ancient Egypt, we can also tell that there must have been intentional breeding of dogs. And we see that in images like this one, where you see two dogs, and the top dog, we could say, is a normal-looking dog. It's a skinny, fairly thin, hound-like dog, perhaps used to help with hunting. The bottom dog has stubby little legs. That dog has a genetic disorder that leads to dwarfism. Dwarfism, genetically caused short limbs, can occur in any mammal species. There are humans of strangely short stature. They have this genetic disorder. It can occur in any wild animal. But if and when it occurs in a wild animal, that wild animal is very unlikely to live a long life, to live long enough to have its own offspring. Because, well, it's not the normal size for its species. If it is a hunting animal, it's unlikely to be able to hunt as effectively as the other members of its species because it's very short. If it's a prey animal, it's probably going to fall victim to a predator animal much more easily than others of its species. So, short stature can occur by genetic mutation in any mammal species. But in wild animals, it will die out. The fact that we see it in ancient Egyptian artworks and also skeletal remains have been found in Egypt, that tells us that people must have been taking care of these animals. They must have been bringing them food, and if they had continuous populations, which it seems like they did, they must have been intentionally saying, look, I've got a dwarf dog, you've got a dwarf female dog, let's bring them together and we'll make dwarf puppies, and that will be cute and interesting. So this is the very first evidence we have of intentional breeding of dogs by people around 4,000 years ago. Modern breeds of dog, just very briefly, many people imagine that breeds of dogs are very ancient, and breed clubs like to talk about breeds of dogs as being very ancient. But all the evidence is that breeds of dogs are actually a very modern phenomenon. They arose primarily in the 19th century, and this whole thing of having, 200 breeds of dogs, whatever it may be, that's a very modern phenomenon and is a product of a modern understanding of what you can achieve by intensive inbreeding. And by the way, it's extremely unhealthy. A recent genetic study has shown that if you randomly choose two dogs from any one breed, right? These two dogs are, as far as you know, unrelated, but they are from the same breed. And you compare their DNA, you will find that a random two dogs from one breed are on average as closely related to each other as if they were brother and sister. It's not quite as bad in some breeds, but in other breeds it's much worse. So the inbreeding that went into creating modern dog breeds, first of all, it's much more recent than people imagine, and secondly, it's much more intense than people imagine and has all sorts of negative health impacts. Okay, so there's a little bit of history. There's a little bit of background on what are these animals that we are surrounded by. So, I asked you at the beginning how many of you have a dog. More than half of you raised your hands. Even those of you who did not raise your hands, if I ask you what is a dog, how does a dog live, what's a dog's life like, what will pop into your head are the dogs that you see around you here in Warsaw, here in Poland, other places in the developed Western world. That is to say, these are animals that live in people's homes as pets. That's the primary image that people in the Western world have of what a dog is like. But in fact, most dogs are not pets. We don't know exactly how many dogs are alive on this planet today, but a very rough guess is that there are 1 billion dogs on the planet today. How many of those dogs are pets? Well, probably around 30%, probably around 300 million. These are guesses, not detailed estimates, but probably around 30% of the dogs in the world today live inside homes as pets. Very few dogs live as what we could call true wild animals, right? Very few dogs live the lives, say, of wolves, living completely away from human beings, hunting prey. That is something dogs are not very good at, and there do not seem to be many dogs that live like that. So how do most dogs live? Most dogs live as scavengers on the edges of human civilization. So I'm not exactly sure from where we are today, where would be the closest place where you would see those dogs. When I'm at home in Phoenix, Arizona, I say to people, drive south 3.5 hours and cross the border into Mexico. And the moment you cross the border, you will see street dogs everywhere. Now, from Poland, I'm not exactly sure. The south of Italy, I have definitely seen them there. But what about if we went, wouldn't it be closer if we went east? There are street dogs in Russia. I have seen them in Moscow, and I imagine they're in other Russian cities. Romania, Turkey. I would say southern Italy would be the nicest place to go, but I think the closest is probably the Russian border. That's how most dogs live. Most dogs in the world today, and probably even more dogs historically, live on streets, in parks. They don't want to get away from people because they're not hunting their own food. They're taking the food that we don't want anymore. They're taking our trash. But they're not wild animals, and they're not pet animals either. They're living in a gray zone in between. That's where most of them live. Now, most of those dogs die young. The life expectancy of a pet dog is, well, it depends on the dog, but some of these very inbred breeds of dogs, like pugs, have a life expectancy of only 8 years. But a healthy, outbred, mixed breed dog might live 14, 15, 16 years. Dogs living out on the street probably only live 4 years if they're lucky. And in fact, most of them will not reach their first birthday. They die before their first birthday. This photograph I took in the Bahamas. The Bahamas is not a poor part of the world. It's a beautiful part of the world. But it has a lot of street dogs. This is not because of poverty, but because of cultural factors, that the people there appreciate having street dogs. And I was just having fun, really, but I went and visited with a scholar at the College of the Bahamas who had studied people's attitudes to these dogs. And we were talking about how so many street dogs die very young. And he was saying to me that his impression, he hadn't actually studied this, but his impression was that the best chance for a dog pup was if, when it comes time for weaning, right, dog mothers wean at about 8 weeks, if the mother leaves the pup near a human home that is not already caring for a dog. And you know how people love dog puppies. My colleagues often tease me that all the students want to work with me because all I do is cuddle puppies all day long. And it's true, we do spend a lot of time cuddling puppies, but it's not the only thing we do. And so this had me thinking, because dog puppies around 8, 9 weeks, they are very, very cute. But younger puppies have never seemed to me to be very cute. 1, 2 week puppies I never thought were very cute. And so I was thinking about what this guy, his name was Fielding, what he was telling me about how a smart dog mother, when she weans the pups, leaves them near a human home. And I was thinking about what people say about how cute puppies are, and I wondered, is there a connection? Does dog cuteness engage human caring just at the point in their lives where human caring will make the biggest difference? Because when they're being nursed by their mother, they're safe. They have their mother's milk, they're safe. Once they're a few months old, 4, 5, 6 months old, they are again fairly safe. They're going to live by eating human trash, and a 6-month-old dog is very capable of going around trash dumps and finding trash. But when they're newly weaned, when they're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 weeks old, they're very vulnerable because they're not so good at getting trash. They're not so strong and they're not so knowledgeable about where to find trash. So it's at that point that they are most likely to die and where human help could have the biggest benefit. And so I had a student who had friends who bred several breeds of dogs. And she was able to get photographs of these dogs from birth until something like 6 months of age. And we simply showed people on a computer screen photographs of the pups of different ages. And we just asked them, how cute are these pups? We had 3 different breeds of dog. I had to make up a story when we published this about how we had chosen from scientific principles, why these were the right breeds. But the truth was, these were the breeds of pups that the student's friend, sorry? Well, they were the ones we had available, exactly. They were the ones that the student's friends were breeding. So that's what we had, but they were interestingly diverse. A Jack Russell is a rather small dog, a Cano Corso is a rather large dog, and a White Shepherd is another large dog, but it looks different from a Cano Corso. We had photographs from birth to 7 months of age, every week for the first few months, and then not quite so frequently afterwards. And so we show people a picture. How cute is this dog? There's a slider underneath. You get to tell us how attractive you think the dog is. What does it say? 51, when I say humans, I mean university students, saw these photographs and rated them. And I love data. Let me show you some data. So here's some data. You see how attractive the puppies were on a scale going up the graph, and you see how old the dog was on a scale going along the bottom of the graph. And what you can see is that when they're very young, they're not so cute. Then they get cuter, and then as they get older, they get less cute again. And we had a smart guy who fitted a mathematical function to this for us and was able to tell us the moment of maximum cuteness. When are, and these are the Jack Russells, when are Jack Russells most attractive to human beings? And the answer is 7.7 weeks. So it's almost exactly what I predicted. Just at the age when the mother is sick and tired of these puppies, human beings are most likely to say, yes, yes, I want to help this puppy. Jack Russells, Cano Corsos, the same shape of function. The mathematical peak is a little bit earlier than I would have liked, but if you're looking at the graph, you can see that there's one data point that sort of pops out. There happened to be one 5-week-old puppy who was just so beautiful that he rather upset the function. But you see it's the same basic idea. And then for the White Shepherds, which by the way are just German Shepherds with white fur, I again get exactly what I was asking for. So dogs are cutest just at that, most attractive to people, just at that moment in their lives where our intervention can make the biggest difference. So I love this because it demonstrates, it supports the hypothesis that I went into it with. It's very, very nice data, but I also love that it enables me to do this. So get yourselves ready for this, because I can now show you photographs of puppies that are scientifically proven to be the cutest possible puppies. So are you ready? Oh. Aren't they just unbelievably cute? Don't you just want to take those home with you right now? So those are the cutest photos of, these are the least cute on the younger side, and in every case these are basically the newborns, the earliest we could get the photos. What's interesting to think is, I think you'll agree they're less cute, but if we had a way of asking their mothers would answer the question differently. Their mothers would say, the newborns are really cute, I want to care for them. Whereas the mothers would say, those 8-week-olds, get those away from me. right? She's had enough by 8 weeks. And then the least attractive on the older side are these, the oldest ones. I think, for me, if you offered me a choice, let's say the Jack Russell, that column 3 Jack Russells, yes, the middle one is the cutest one. But if that middle one came into my life and turned into the one at the bottom, I would still want him. You know, we would be developing a relationship. We would still be together. Okay, so that's one little story now, a slightly old story about how people care about dogs. And it shows us how people's caring about dogs has an impact on the dogs' lives. It saves their lives. If we're talking about how most dogs on the planet live and how even more dogs lived even just 2 generations ago in the West, it shows us how people caring about dogs impacts dogs' lives. Now let's talk about dogs caring about people. So here's my dog. She cares about me. But how much does a dog care? Now, if you follow any news at all, you know that stories of dogs caring about people are part of our culture every day, every week. And I was very pleased that I was actually able to find a Polish one. Dog, quote, saved life of missing Polish girl. I don't know, did any of you hear about this? A child called Julia who vanished. When did she vanish? It says Friday, but what month or year was that? I don't know. She vanished on Friday, but it was in the winter. I don't know, it wasn't last Friday, it was sometime in the winter because it was -5 degrees Celsius overnight. And she only survived because her dog stayed with her and cuddled with her on Friday night so that she was still alive when she was found by firefighters on Saturday morning. I tried to Google to see if I could find out where in Poland did this happen, but I couldn't find any more details than that. But certainly our media are full of stories of dogs helping people. Now let's leave on one side dogs who have been trained to help people. If you train your dog to find people buried under snow, that's wonderful, but the credit goes to you for training your dog to do this. The dog is not doing this spontaneously. This is something that is a product of training. What I'm interested in is the dog's own motivations. Does your dog really want to save you? So how can we turn that into an experiment? Well, we tried a few things, and what we came up with was a box big enough for a person to crawl into. That's the silver box at the back. Inside that box is this dog's owner. And this person is going to cry out in distress from inside the box. The dog can see inside the box. The dog's behavior suggests that the dog is distressed and unhappy. The dog has 2 minutes. This is not a whole 2 minutes of video because it doesn't take 2 minutes. The dog rescues the owner. Isn't that cute? Isn't that cute? We have 2 control conditions. Come on, move on. Thank you, thank you. We have 2 control conditions. We have 2 control conditions. This is one of them. She's now going to just read from inside the box from a text carefully chosen not to include the word help. And what we see is that the dog is basically bored. The dog calms down, drinks, and ultimately will just lie down and listen. Now, the final control condition I do not show you video of, but you can see how the top of the box has a hole in it. So we take some treats, we make sure that the dog likes the treats, we place a tray inside the box so that if anything falls into the box through the hole, you can hear it hit the tray. and we drop treats into the box. Each treat makes a sound when it hits the bottom, and we look to see whether the dog will open the box to get the treat. What did we find? What did we find? What we found was that out of 60 dogs, 20 of them rescued their owner. So that's perhaps a little disappointing. Why only 20? What was with the other 40? Did they not care, or did they not understand? And I think they did not understand. And my reason for thinking they did not understand is that 20 dogs rescued their owner, 18 dogs opened the box to get the food. If a dog opened the box to get the food, then it always rescued its owner. That makes me think we know they wanted the food. We know their motivation was there for the food. So that makes me think that when they did not open for their owner, that was because it was too difficult. They didn't understand what they were being asked to do. We did a follow-up experiment. This time we pre-trained every dog to open the box. We showed them how to open the box. We gave them treats for opening the box. When we then repeated the experiment, now the problem is most of the dogs open the box, yes, to rescue their owner, but in the other conditions as well. So that wasn't a particularly successful follow-up. The most interesting thing is that we saw more behaviors that indicated the dog was stressed when their owner was inside the box crying out than in the control conditions. So I think dogs do care, but I think we overestimate our dog's intelligence a lot of the time. We can train dogs to do wonderful things, but when we rely on them to figure things out for themselves, they're less successful at that than we tend to assume. Okay, so let me finish up by sharing with you one last story, which is a very new story, where we're investigating how well people understand dog emotions. Most people who live in societies where people have pet dogs have very strong intuitions about what their dogs are trying to communicate. They tell us, we believe that our dogs are talking to us and that we understand them, which is the ultimate theme of what we're here discussing. So, a happy dog wags his tail. A sad dog lowers his ears. We all feel very strongly that we understand how our dogs express emotion. So here's, for example, from the internet, just one example of many, many, many amusing examples of people understanding dogs' emotions. But I should point out that that's not the only kind of image, the only meme that comes up on the internet about people understanding dogs' emotions. There is an alternative possibility, which is this one, where actually the dog's behavior isn't changing no matter what the emotion is. But I would say that the opinion expressed in the image on the right is more of a minority opinion. I think most people, when you ask them, they say they know how their dog feels, more like on the left. But it's never been the subject of scientific investigation. So let's look at how good people are at reading dogs' emotions. This was a study that was done during the pandemic by one of my newest students, Holly Molinaro, who spent the whole first year of her PhD with me, without us ever meeting. She lived with her parents in Connecticut, and I lived with my family in Arizona, so it's thousands of kilometers apart. But we talked about how to do this experiment without ever coming into contact. So she made videos of her father offering things to the family dog that ought to make the dog happy, like the leash is something that should make the dog happy, or offering things that we anticipate make the dog unhappy, like the vacuum cleaner. Her dog didn't like the vacuum cleaner, okay? Now, in the pandemic, it was mostly bad, but we did have a few positives. We learned how to use Zoom. You use Zoom in Poland, you know what I'm talking about? And when we started using Zoom, we all played with the feature that you could change the background. Isn't that fun? We're kind of sick of it now, but it was fun when it was new. And so that told us that the computer we had in front of us was powerful enough to take a video and extract objects from the background. And so Holly made these videos of her father interacting with the dog, and she extracted the background. So here is Holly's father and Holly's dog. Okay, that's happy. Here is the vacuum cleaner. Okay, that's fun. But we've extracted the background, so we can do some fun things. What about this one? Do you know what that is? Exactly. We've crossed them over. We've taken Holly's father doing something that should make a dog unhappy, but we've taken the dog reacting to something that should make him happy. And now we can show people these videos and we can ask them, how happy is the dog? So here's the original. So on the left, the toolbar, pink, Holly's choice of color, pink toolbar, this is how happy is the dog. You're asking people. Again, we don't get close to the people. It's all done through the web. Perfect pandemic experiment. People say the dog is 7 out of 8 happy in the happy video with the leash and some other things to make a dog happy, not just one video. And then the lower bar, that's where the dog should be unhappy. And you can see nobody suggests the dog is seriously unhappy, but it's a much lower score than in the happy case. Okay. So now we're going to check that cutting and editing videos doesn't mess things up. What we're going to do is we're going to take one of the happy videos, one of Holly's father doing something happy, like the leash, but there are other happy things. There was a toy, there were a few, and we're going to put in the dog's happy reaction to a different happy video. You with me? It's still happy dad, happy dog, but it's the wrong dad video, dog video. And likewise for the unhappy. Unhappy dad, unhappy dog, but we've messed them up. And so just to show that just editing the videos doesn't really affect how people respond. So now we come to the critical one. Happy dad, unhappy dog, unhappy dad, happy dog. And we ask people, how is the dog feeling? And here's what we find. Happy dad, unhappy dog, people say the dog's happy. Unhappy dad, happy dog, people say the dog's unhappy. In other words, there's no evidence that people are even looking at the damn dog. When we ask them how the dog is feeling, at no point do we say, how is the dad feeling? That's not part of it. We're just asking, how is the dog feeling? And every time, people's answer reflects entirely what the man is doing and has nothing to do with what the dog was doing. Now, this is still very much a work in progress. One of the most obvious criticisms of this, but there's no solution that I can think of, is that at no point did we do anything to make the dog seriously unhappy. I mean, we never contemplated, I don't know, getting out a stick and hitting the dog. I mean, we never did anything that would make the dog seriously unhappy. But still, it's interesting because this is certainly within the range of situations where people feel like they know how their dog is feeling. So I'm not going to say we have proven that people never have any idea how their dog is feeling. That would obviously be a crazy claim to make. But it certainly suggests that people's ability to understand how their dogs are feeling is not as obvious, not as widespread as people commonly believe. So that was just a few, really just a few highlights from what my students and I have been doing over the last couple of years. And I hope I've left enough time to take plenty of questions. Second mic needed for questions. And maybe I'll sit down. I think I'm allowed to sit. I think I'm still in shot.
Okay, is it working? It is.
Yes.
We are streaming this, so if somebody wants to ask a question, please raise your hand and I'll walk up with the mic and you can ask the question so that people who are watching online can hear as well.
Could you please replay the video of the leash situation, the original one?
Sure. The original leash video.
Thank you. I wouldn't say this dog is happy.
All right. But that was just one example.
Okay.
Hi, it will be a bit different question in this subject, of course, but there is a common belief of that people believe dogs could be falling in love with their humans. Is that a correct statement? Is that really happening, or it just we assume so?
So I've written a book called Dog is Love, How and Why Your Dog Loves You. So I have to say yes. But I mean, what matters really is what we want to mean by love. So I have never in a scientific publication used the word love. Love is a word of common language. It has a very wide range of possible meanings and interpretations. And in fact, you said falling in love. I would avoid using that form of love. So that when, at least in English, when we talk of falling in love, we're clearly talking about romantic love, partner love. The kind of love that I think our dogs feel for us is the kind of love that a child has towards a parent. It's what we call in the developmental psychology literature, we would say attachment. So that children have attachment figures, that kind of love, which is a sense of reassurance, of comfort, of support. In that sense of love, then I do believe that dogs love us, yes.
So I have a question, because there is many videos in internet showing that when someone is sad, their dog is coming to cheer them up. And my question is, do the dog really knows, understands that we are sad and it wants to cheer us up? Or how does this process work? What does the dog knows about our state in that moment?
So that's a very, very interesting question. It's not only internet videos, but there are a couple of scientific papers. And the phenomenon is very, very easy to show yourself. If you just sit down and pretend to cry, and you don't need to be an actor, you don't need to be very good at this. You can sit down. If you live with a dog and with another human, this is an interesting thing to do. Sit down and pretend to cry. And unless you are a good actor, the human you live with will know that you are not sad. The human you live with will see your behavior as strange, but will not see it as expressing sadness. But your dog will seem to be convinced that you are sad and will come to you. Now, so there are two parts of this that are interesting. One is, why is the dog fooled when your human partner is not fooled? That's strange, and I don't know the answer. And the second part of it is, why is your dog coming to you? Is your dog coming to you to comfort you, or is your dog coming to you because your dog needs you to comfort him? In very small children, if a mother is upset, usually we talk about a mother, I guess a father potentially, but if a mother is upset, the small child comes to the mother seeking reassurance from the mother, because the mother's upset upsets the child. And then children reach some point, I'm afraid I don't remember what age, but they reach some point where now when mother is upset, they come to comfort mother, right? And with dogs, we don't know which it is, but we do know that they are even more responsive than other human beings are, which is very puzzling. It's a very interesting phenomenon.
Of course, the alternative explanation would be that the dog comes to see why are you behaving so strangely, such as similar to any familiar human who would maybe not be empathic, but would check why you're doing strange things.
So the experimental study includes controls for that. So I think they have the person hum or sing or something, do some, they have control for that. Yeah. Because otherwise it's a very important question.
What was the most odd or weird behavior of the dog which we cannot explain by any of our knowledge?
That's too difficult. The most strange, weird behavior of dogs that we're unable to explain. Well, here's. So I showed you the data that shows that people find 8-week-old puppies the most attractive puppies. But here's the fundamental question: why do we love them so? Why did I spend $500 taking my dog to a cardio specialist? Why will it hurt me so much when that is, when she won't live more than another year or so? Why will it hurt me that much? Like it hurt those people 8,000 years ago that much, right? But they're useful. I mean, more so to people 8,000 years ago when they had to hunt in thick forests than to us today. But that doesn't, I don't know that that's enough to explain how they draw us in. That really, really fascinates me, how they draw us in. And I don't feel like it's anything close to being explained. It's actually, there are miracles that because they are so everyday, we fail to notice what miracles they are. And it's one of those. The fact that we love dogs so much is one of those everyday miracles. Because they're not, in our society today, they're not very useful, really, honestly, seriously. The practical benefits of having a dog are pretty minor. Justinia's dog can find truffles. My dog doesn't do anything useful, and yet I wouldn't part with her for anything. So that to me is the most curious thing. And I think although that study I showed you is just about how the puppies look, and how puppies look is important, ultimately I think that it's more about behavior. I just don't know how we would do that. Maybe if we had animatronic dogs, so we had perfect control over their behavior, we could start to uncover which behaviors draw people in. Now there's if you know this field at all, you'll have heard of Konrad Lorenz and his idea of Kindchenschema, which is the idea that the young of all species are attractive to us because the young of our species is attractive to us because we need to care for them or we would die out, but that it sort of generalizes to other species. But I don't think that's explained. Dogs are covered in fur. Nobody wants a baby covered in fur, Dogs have tails. Nobody wants a baby with a tail. And then they have these snouts, which, I think a snout is a very sweet thing on a dog. But I wouldn't want my child to have a snout. So I think it's really puzzling. Yeah.
The follow-up to this, isn't it the big eyes and the flatness of the face, which also explains why the brachycephalic breeds are so popular, even if they're not healthy, that they look that more attractive to us, which is to me.
But
not.
do you? So I think your last comment is. So you're saying you do not find brachycephalic dogs?
I find all dogs lovely.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't choose that one. Maybe it's because I know that they are not as healthy.
Okay, so let's do this let's do an experiment right here. Okay, you have to choose. You can only put your hand up for one. Do you prefer a dog with a good snout on him or a dog with a smushed in nose? Hands up for a good snout. Okay, hands up for a smushed in nose. Well, that's fine. That's okay. But right? It was 99 to 1. Well, not 99, but it was. Most people, we've got to do this study because it would be so easy to do, but actually brachycephalic dogs are a minority interest. There are people who love them and that's fine. But most people like a dog with a good snout. Okay, let's do another one. You've got to choose one of these two options, either covered in fur or hairless. How many people prefer a dog covered in fur? How many people prefer a hairless dog? Not a single one. So Lorenz was wrong. Lorenz was clearly wrong about this, right? Now the eyes, maybe he was right. There is a paper where they used Photoshop to change the size of the eyes, and it seems that people do like bigger eyes, more like a human baby and less like a dog. But the eyes, I mean, the eyes are kind of subtle compared to the snout, right? The snouts are really substantial thing, although covered in fur. There is a very rare genetic disorder, human babies born covered in fur. There are no ill effects. There are no ill health effects of being a human covered in fur. But people will do anything to get the fur off their baby. It's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. So I think Lawrence is wrong. And I think that we actually find dogs attractive when they do not look like people.
Thank you. And I also just had a follow-up question for the topic was before about the fake crying.
Yeah.
Which I found very interesting because dogs are known to respond to cortisol levels. So the cortisol level in human and in dog, they're aligned. So they...
You sure you mean cortisol and not oxytocin?
I mean cortisol,
yeah.
the stress levels.
Yeah.
It was some paper that's shown yes. that the more the stress the owner, the more stress yes. the dog.
Yes.
So they actually can like somehow probably feel or respond to our hormone levels, which to me, I wanted to ask you if you have any hypothesis of why they are misled by a fake cry if it's really fake.
Well, I mean, the study, the video I showed you of the person inside the box crying out in distress, and the behavior of the dog shows you that the dog is distressed. We didn't measure cortisol, it's too damn expensive, but I don't doubt that the dog's cortisol goes up when the stress behaviors go up. So presumably, just as we resonate to each other's stress through behavior, so too our dogs resonate to our stress through behavior. But why they would be so responsive to fake distress, that is very puzzling. Yeah, it could be. It could be. But it's certainly an interesting question.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. Well, just to follow up, I might consider a hypothesis that we actually teach them to respond to particular behavioral cues, such as like me crying or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's not distress per se, but the behavior, just like we train them to respond to certain other strange behaviors arbitrarily chosen that. But I had a different question. I'm very interested in psychiatric disorders in animals, and I just wondered whether in your experience you have ever encountered a behavior in dogs that you would qualify as, well, a psychiatric disorder, perhaps something beyond the obvious, beyond anxiety or depression, perhaps hallucinations or delusions even. What is your experience?
I haven't got any experience around hallucinations or anything I could identify as delusion. The nearest work I've done is we did look at aging in dogs. There is a syndrome in dogs that is somewhat similar to Alzheimer's disease, but I'm afraid it wouldn't be very interesting to you. We just looked at working memory being a particularly sensitive marker of age-related cognitive decline. It's an interesting question. I have wondered, so we know that the 200 breeds of dog are horrendously inbred, and that ought to lead to it does lead to high frequencies of genetic disease in different breeds of dog. But that ought to include high frequencies of genetically related psychiatric syndromes in dogs. But I haven't found anybody who's Springer Rage. English Springer Spaniels have a syndrome called Springer Rage. But it's probably not terribly interesting to you. I mean, they just, all of a sudden, for no reason, become extremely aggressive and unpleasant. Like elephants. Do elephants have rage?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
It's connected to it's part of the reproductive system.
Oh, okay.
It has a name.
Okay. Well, so Springer Rage is very random, and it was always known to run in families. So they have identified genes for that. But again, it's not really what you're asking.
So, hello. I have actually two things. One, to the fact that we find cubs more attractive than grown-ups.
Mm-hmm.
And does that mean that we have a soft spot for beings that are weaker than us?
in some sense, I suppose. But whether it's the weakness, I mean, being juvenile includes being weak, but it has many other aspects as well. So I don't know.
Yes, and also another thing, to that experiment when the dog, when the owner didn't cry out for help, most of the dogs did not understand what was going on and what they should do. I've heard that wolves are smarter than dogs, and this is humans' fault. For caring, the humans, by caring for dogs, they made them less intelligent. Is that true? Would you agree?
Well, I wouldn't put it like that. I mean, that is a theory that is out there. Again, this would go back to Konrad Lorenz, the idea that domestication weakens the intellect. But I think that's an unsophisticated way of looking at it. I think that domestication is a form of biological adaptation. So certain wolves adapted to a changed world. I mean, we live in a time when vast numbers of species are going extinct because we human beings are changing the world. And we started changing the world at the end of the last ice age. And dogs, who were some wolves, they found a way of living in a world and thriving in a world that humans changed. And that is neither more nor less intelligent than the way that wolves live. I mean, wolves, yes, they need tremendous intelligence to live out in the forest near Overtalt and find the deer and the boar and survive. Our dogs need a different kind of intelligence to survive with us. It's not more, it's not less, it's just different.
I saw a study where the task required cooperation, and when the task requires specific types of cooperation, dogs do outsmart wolves.
Oh, thank you very much.
I also have questions in the chat I can see, so maybe one question from the chat and then a question from the room.
Okay.
And questions from the chat. Question number 1. What is Clive's opinion about talk buttons for dogs and what the buttons represent?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, great. So, so there is at present no evidence that dogs can press buttons to communicate their thoughts. The very brief videos you can see are not collected under controlled circumstances. They're not long enough to deduce anything of why the dog is pressing these buttons. So there's an absence of evidence. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. At some point, when people have been looking long enough, we might begin to say that there isn't anything there. But for now, I'm willing to be agnostic. It has been a few years now, and so the longer I wait for evidence, the less likely it seems that there is evidence. But for now, I'd say I'm agnostic, leaning atheist. So there is data being collected. So there is a scientist, Federica Rossano, at the University of California, San Diego, and some of the button pressing dogs, their buttons are connected in such a way that the presses are recorded, and that data is sent to Rossano. Yeah.
Hello. I work with dogs and also their owners on a daily basis, and I have find myself struggling with communicating with owners because a lot of people who don't really know things about dogs are looking at them really stereotypically, such as like wagging tail means the dog is happy, when the dog is licking me, it means it loves me, and it actually it can be very hard for the dog when the owner is misinterpreting the communication of them. But when I tell the owner that when the dog is licking them, it can actually mean that please don't touch me, please get out of my sight because I'm really feeling uncomfortable. And also the wagging of the tail can mean, like in the film, that the dog is in big distress. And you work with a lot of people, a lot of masses, and do you know any methods to tell people that don't have the knowledge of the dogs, how the dogs really how the dog is really feeling? Because I have struggled with that.
So it's interesting to me that in the dog trainer behaviorist community, you can buy whole books of color photographs of dogs doing different behaviors, and underneath each behavior of the dog, there's an explanation as to what the dog is feeling when it's doing that behavior. But there's no scientific basis for that. There are no studies that establish that this behavior equals this state, this behavior equals this state. Even a dog and its wagging tail. There's no set of scientific studies that show. There's one study that when the dog's tail wags towards the left, the dog is happier than when the dog's tail wags towards the right. One study from Italy. So it's interesting to me that dog professionals are convinced that they can line up behavior, emotional state one-to-one, when I don't think it's likely that that's how dog behavior and emotional states connect. For one thing, I think that different individual dogs are using their behaviors differently. I don't think there's a single code that applies to all dogs. And for that matter, I doubt that emotional state and overt behavior actually connect all the time in a simple one-to-one manner. So I'm sure you're right that people who spend a lot of time around dogs have a better understanding of dog behavior and how that connects to emotion than ordinary lay people. But I would like there to be a series of studies, and we have started doing a bit of this. We have started bringing dogs into, more than just in the videos I showed you, bringing dogs into situations where this should be a happy situation. What are the behaviors of the dog in this situation? And this should be a less happy situation. What are the behaviors here? But I think it's work that needs to be done.
Hi, so going back to talking about how humans love dogs, can it be connected to two things? First of all, how we interpret and show affection to others, which is mostly through physical touch and closeness. Because like I've met so many people that say they prefer dogs than cats because cats don't want to be hugged or kissed. And dogs can bear it longer. And our history with keeping dogs for many years, that it started with their functionality and usefulness, which is why people started to keep dogs around. And then, because it's like with other animals as well, if we start to care for an animal, spend longer time with them, getting to know them, we can see that they are intelligent in some ways. They are maybe behave in a funny way, can be playful. Like I also saw a video of like a person taking care of an injured bee, and some people said that, oh, it's so cute. So where was I going with that? So yeah, after so many years, is it that just people learn to love dogs? Because it started with the usefulness, but then just people started keeping dogs because they were a good company, because they offered some unconditional love. And like if people preferred crows for their usefulness, then maybe after so many years of people taking care of them and teaching children that, oh, crows are so cute, maybe it would be like this.
So I think it's a very interesting question. I don't think the dog's usefulness is sufficient to explain the widespread affection that people have for dogs. So it's not surprising that a hunter who has an excellent dog who helps him hunt and helps him get meat to feed his family, not surprising that that hunter has positive feelings towards that dog. And we could think of other examples of individual people who have dogs who are of great practical relevance to them. But for most of us, that's not the case. My dog does nothing useful for me, and most of us, truth be told, our dogs are not doing anything useful, certainly not enough to pay the vet bills, right? So the fact that we love them so much needs a different explanation. And I think you're on the right track. I think that there is this very interesting thing that our social behaviors and dogs' social behaviors are surprisingly compatible. I mean, there was that guy, Stanley Coren, who tried to convince everybody that hugging your dog was a bad idea. And certainly there are dogs that don't like being hugged. But overall, it's very interesting how many affectionate behaviors that people want to spontaneously offer their dogs appear to be totally compatible with what dogs want to have from us. And then conversely, dogs, the things they want to do to us, towards us, affectionate things, curling up on the sofa, maybe licking, they are then interpreted totally spontaneously by us as affectionate and compatible. And that's a very interesting phenomenon. We're not that closely related, right? We're primates, they're carnivores. It's kind of surprising that our affectionate behaviors are so compatible. So it's a very interesting point.
Thank you. So I wanted to come back a little. My question is connected with a lady's question before. And it's about people reading dogs' emotions. And my experience as a dog owner, I agree that most of people do not read dogs' emotions as well as they think they do.
Right.
In many situations, they expect the dogs to feel a certain way. And even you here used this phrase that we put a dog in the situation that should be happy situation.
Yeah.
But we are not really sure if it is happy, like this leash
right.
So that's one thing. And I was wondering, because there are, I think, studies with reading human emotions by people. And I'm not really sure if we are that good in reading human emotions out of context also. So I think the context is very important. And another thing is, also you mentioned it, we do know our own dog very well.
Yeah.
And in most occasions we can say if, for example, it's barking in excitement or it's barking in distress.
Yeah.
But it does not mean that we can equally well read another dog.
So our research was actually inspired by the recent human research showing that people are not as good at reading other people's emotions as we tend to assume they are. That's what inspired us to investigate this in dogs. I've forgotten the second part of your question now. Yeah. Anyway, so that's what put us on that path to investigate this. Yeah.
I have questions from the chat, and there are tons of questions there. Yes, so maybe I'm going to go with 2 questions from the chat, 1 question from the room, and then 2 questions from the chat again. And we'll see how long you last with this. Okay. So how could we make studies about dog behavior if we can't interpret their language? That's question number 1. If everybody's so bad about interpreting dog language, then how is there any scientific, process going on? Secondly, since I said 2 questions from the chat, 1 question from the room, do free-ranging dog mothers really wean their pups at the age of 2 months? I had an idea that it happens later.
Well, the second question is easier than the first question. Weaning age in dogs varies with a number of factors. 2 months is fair enough. It's something like 2 months. It can be later, it can be earlier. It would depend on any number of factors in a dog's life. Dogs living on the street, there are climatic factors, how hot and cold, and the availability of food, and the mother herself is malnourished while she's nursing. Dog fathers, I'm sorry to say, are not very supportive. Wolf fathers bring food for the mother. Dog fathers are much less likely to do that, so a mother may wean just because she's starving to death and has to go off and find food on her own. Okay, what was the first question? The language question. Okay. So Right. So, so I think studying dogs and how they live with people is more challenging than it looks, because I think our intuitions are only of limited usefulness. Even our structured intuitions, like I was saying about how you can buy books full of color photos of dogs behaving in different ways and telling you what the dog is feeling in each of these photographs, and it's just not that simple. But I don't think it's beyond the reach of science. I mean, whether we were entirely successful in our experiment that I showed you the video, whether we were entirely successful in inducing a positive emotional state in the dog or inducing a negative emotional state in the dog, our success in one particular experiment doesn't undermine the whole idea. It's still, in principle, a reasonable thing to say, well, here are a set of circumstances that dogs seek out and that therefore must be leading to positive emotional states. And here's a set of circumstances that dogs avoid, and therefore if they're pushed into these circumstances, it's reasonable to assume that those are negative emotional states. It's still a reasonable approach. It's just more challenging than it looks on the face of it.
So I have a question. Can we actually tell which dog breed is more expressive in their love and care to their owners? Because, for example, golden retrievers are known for being very loving, but can it be judged on the breed, actually?
Well, so, as you probably know, there are whole books where you can look up, like there's the American Kennel Club's Book of the Dog, which is now also online. And you can see a page that tells you all the characteristics of any particular breed of dog. But that is almost complete fiction. There's almost no truth in that. The latest studies, there was a very big study published last year on thousands of dogs. It looked at the genetics of the dogs, it looked at the behavior of the dogs. And the interesting thing is, most people assume, and certainly the breed clubs encourage us to believe, that if you know what breed of dog you have, you know most of the important behavioral, psychological, emotional qualities of that dog. Whereas the big scientific study shows that knowing the breed of the dog tells you less than 10% of what the behavior of that dog is. So there is much more difference from one golden retriever to the next golden retriever than there is between golden retrievers and Jack Russell Terriers. Most of the differences are dog to dog to dog, and the relatively small differences breed to breed to breed. So it's exactly the other way round from what the breed clubs encourage us to believe. Yeah?
Okay, another question from the chat then. It is said that many behaviorists are strictly against letting your dog sleep on your bed. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I have no idea where that comes from. I mean, what do they think is going to happen? I don't know. I mean, if you and the dog are comfortable with it, do it. If either one of you is not comfortable with it, don't do it. Don't force your dog onto the bed if your dog doesn't like the idea. And don't force, you know, if your partner doesn't want the dog in the bed, I would suggest, yeah, just don't, you know, don't, it's as George Bush said, different strokes for different folks.
I think we have one more question from the room. And we are going to be wrapping it up soon, I think. So maybe one or two questions more.
A little on the behavior, I think a lot of you might be interested in Alexa Capra. It's an Italian ethologist, and she actually constructed a dog's ethogram, and she does a lot of work on learning about dogs' behavior. I don't know if you're a professor, you're aware of her work. No. Anyway, it's very interesting because, like, there's, for instance, there's a discrepancy between how Americans interpret the bow and how we in Europe interpret it. Because in America it's like the play bow, so it's always an invitation to play, whereas we understand that it depends on the context. So this is just an annotation. But a bigger question I have always, for a long time in my mind, is how can we actually understand, not in terms of humans, but in terms of like any, like for instance, dog sports, whether dogs actually like or love them or not. Because what we do is we train the dog to jump, agility, or do obedience or whatever, and then we tend to say, oh, our dogs love that, our dogs like that. And I always have in mind whether my dog actually would like that, to do that, if there was no training process and if we can actually have any means to assess that.
Well, so we have a tradition of believing that we understand what our dogs want because we believe we understand their behavioral expressions in terms of wagging tails and ears and so on and so on. I think if we want to know what our dogs want, we should strip back to a simpler way of understanding animal behavior. So there was a series of studies done in the 1970s and 1980s by a scientist at Oxford, Miriam Stamp Dawkins. She was Richard Dawkins' first wife. And she was interested in the welfare of chickens. What do chickens want? Nobody has any intuitions about how a happy chicken acts and how an unhappy chicken acts. So she did very simple experiments. Chickens usually have to stand on metal grids. Do they actually like standing on metal grids? She gives them a choice. Here's a metal grid space. Here's a different floor. I forget what the other floor was. You just see. What does the chicken choose? And then you put a door in between so that it's a bit difficult to move from one to the other. And then you can actually measure how much the chicken cares, whether the chicken can be bothered to make the way through the heavy door. If you want to know whether your dog likes agility, then having given your dog a chance to experience agility, give your dog a choice and see, does your dog want to go to the agility place? If there's some sign, some way you can communicate to the dog, we're going to agility now, is the dog energetic and enthused about going that way? There was a time when I was away, my wife put our dog in a doggy daycare. And this place seemed like a jungle to me. It seemed terrible. I wasn't happy with my wife for doing this. But my wife, she's an engineer, not an animal behavior person, she said, but the dog loves it. So I went along, and she was right. The dog was so thrilled. The dog almost wanted to jump out of the car before we opened it, because she was so excited to go to this place. So if you want to know what your dog likes, ask your dog. Don't try and interpret tails and ears and everything. Ask your dog. Well, that's true. That's true. Right. Yes, okay, that's a fair point.
Can I interrupt you, Clive?
Yes.
Is that okay? Because I'd like to... We have a wonderful paper actually published on frisbee, dog frisbee, by Jack and Sarah, co-authored just recently, where they talk exactly about this. So have a look at it. I think you may like it.
We need that paper.
One last question, okay? Oh my goodness, I have two people raising...
And well, maybe somebody who hasn't had a chance.
People in chat, I'm very sorry, but okay, we're done. We have two questions in the room, and then that's it. Okay, so question one.
I have a question about dog food toys and dog enrichment, because I have heard a lot of statements, which I personally agree with, that dogs need enrichment, like mentally, and food toys like licky mats and Kongs are very enriching for them. And actually, every dog should have an opportunity to be enriched with them sometime in a while. And do you agree with this statement? What do you think about dog food toys and the theme of...
I think they can be great. I think they can be great. I agree with you that dogs need enrichment. I would only say people often don't realize dogs need a lot more sleep than human beings do. So the fact that your dog is, if you go to work during the day and you don't notice your dog is sleeping all day, then you don't worry about it. But if you work at home, and because of the pandemic, more people were working at home, and more people came to me saying they were worried that their dog was sleeping at least half of the day, that's fine. Dogs sleep on average 14 hours a day. So that's quite a bit of the daytime as well as the nighttime. But yeah, those toys are great.
So the one last question then?
One last question.
if we would like to take control over not your own dog, but just another dog, what would be the starting point?
What do you mean by take control?
Take control, just like that.
So I'm not 100% clear. I mean, control can mean many different things. If you mean I want to convince this dog to come home with me, control in that sense, then treats. Treats are going to convince the dog that I am in charge, that the dog should come under my control. Is that what you meant? To obey my commands? Well, we need to establish a relationship where the dog understands that following my commands leads to good things, which could be treats or whatever the dog enjoys. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you to our wonderful speaker. Thank you. It was quite intense. Yeah,
well, thank you for making it happen.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much. If you, yeah.